Well, this morning I'm feeling kind of presidential, and so I'm going to give you like the state of the church address. And what I want to do today is just kind of pause together as a group and think about our church. I want us to think about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And so I'm just going to kind of walk through those things in order, and we're going to start with where we've been. And so as a church, many of you know we've been around for about 11 and a half years. And so I'm going to try to sum up 11 and a half years in about 15 minutes. And for some of you, you're here, you're just visiting today, you're just checking things out, and maybe, you know, in all honesty, you're like, I don't even know how I ended up here. You know, maybe somebody invited you, or maybe you saw the sign, or maybe you woke up today and a voice just told you, go to Brookview. And so here you are. You know, I don't know how you got here, but I want to tell you up front, this message today is going to be very different from what we normally do. And so let me just say to you, if you're visiting, just kind of checking it out, sit back, and as Aaron Rodgers would say, relax, and just kind of enjoy the story. Okay, where have we been? For the last 11 years, if you've been with us, you know there have been some amazingly beautiful things, and people have come to truly know that they're loved by God, and they have responded to that love. As a community, we've done some really beautiful things. We've served the poor in Haiti. We've served struggling families outside the church right here in our community in some beautiful ways. And I'm tempted to go into that, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Over the years here, some amazing friendships have been built. People have walked alongside one another in some of the deepest of ways. And so I could go on and on and on about some of the beautiful things that have happened here. But if you've been around here for very long, you also know that it's been a struggle. I mean, if we can just be upfront. For many, many years, we were constantly like just teetering on the edge of having to shut down. And it's interesting because I have a pastor friend named Randy, and he started a church in Portland 2 weeks prior to the start of Brookview, okay, back in 2003. So our two churches are like sort of like twins. Now, prior to starting the Portland church, Randy had successfully started a church in Vancouver, and he was very experienced as a pastor, a church planter, and he was deeply connected down in that area. So before he launched the church in Portland, he made sure that several things were in place. He raised tons and tons of money, and he put together a church staff. He actually had two other guys that fully raised their own support. And so they started as a group with 3 full-time pastors, and then they mixed in some like part-time admin staff. Okay, and then this amazing thing happened for them. They were in the process, and it turned out there was a dying church in downtown Portland, a church that happened to be in our same denomination that had a primo building. And they ended up, get this, they ended up giving it to Randy and his new church. Now, like, imagine that. Being given this beautiful historic building in downtown. Okay, so they had this magnificent facility. And then in addition to that, both Randy and the other pastors and some of the other staff were all kind of from the area. And they had been serving in churches, some of them large churches, in that area. And so they had connection after connection to person after person. And so before the church ever started, they had a committed core of several hundred adults. Out of that core, they identified and they trained ministry leaders. They had, you know, worship leaders and worship teams and small group leaders and children's ministry folks and sound people and all the stuff that they felt like they need. Okay, before they launched out of that core, they actually had a functioning elder board before they ever had their first service. So they had all the pieces. Okay, they had this primo facility in downtown Portland. They had a deep well of financial resources. They had a solid group of paid staff. They had a fired up core of a few hundred. And they had volunteer ministry leaders that were identified, trained, and ready to go. Not bad. So if we used like childbirth as a metaphor for starting a church, when this church was born, it really was not an infant at all. Okay, it was like Like they're in the delivery room and they're excited like any couple, and then all of a sudden, this 18-year-old comes out with like 5 o'clock shadow. So Randy's in there and he's got the diapers and the car seat and they're all set, and out pops this man-child that's like, hey, Dad, want to play one-on-one? I bet I could take you. Now, over the years, I would hear from here what was happening there. And you guys are not going to believe this, but sometimes I'd feel jealous. Because Brookview had a very different beginning. Jen and I moved here from Bellingham to start the church. And so we basically parachuted into this community. You know, we didn't know anybody. We had no real connections. We didn't have a core of people. We didn't have a staff. We didn't have a facility. Our financial support was extremely limited. Now, we did our best because we knew those were important things. We did our best to try to develop all of those, but things were tougher than I had anticipated all along the way. Okay, I thought that our church in Bellingham, you know, a huge mega church, I thought that they would back us fully financially, was sort of counting on that. But they ended up only backing us with about 20% of what we needed. So we went out and beat the streets, and we raised as much as we possibly could in other ways. But even after all of that, we really only got to about 60% of what we felt like we needed. But we decided to do it anyway. We felt like we had to go. We were just compelled to do this thing. Okay, plus, we had the most genius strategy to build a strong core group. And we felt like if we had a strong core group, the money would just sort of take care of itself. And so here's how our church in Bellingham, as I mentioned, it's called Cornwall Church. And at that time was about 2,000 people. And Jen and I were well known, and we were very well respected in the church. We'd served and volunteered in many capacities over the years. In fact, Jen even worked as the church secretary there for a while. And then I had done a couple of years as a pastoral intern, which meant that I did a variety of things. I taught classes, I preached, I cleaned toilets, you know, stuff that interns do. And eventually, after my internship and after Jen was done being church secretary, we started a very flourishing ministry in that church. So we were well known. We were well respected there. So we got up in front of the church and we shared our vision for Brookview. And we asked the 2,000 people at the church in Bellingham to help us connect with people in South Snohomish County. Okay? People that might want to be a part of starting a church like Cornwall, like the church in Bellingham that everybody loves so much. And here's what I figured. I figured that we could build a pretty good-sized core that way. I figured that we could assemble at least 30 to 40 adults that way, and that then if we met with those 30 to 40 adults for about a year, we should be able to grow this thing to about 100 and then launch Brookview, okay? And we'd be off and running. So we got up in front of the 2,000 people at Cornwall, and we shared the vision, okay? And it was brilliant. I mean, I don't know another way to say it. I was really good. And so was Jen. I mean, we killed it. And we had these response cards in their bulletins that had actually been professionally designed and professionally printed. We had people that gave us money kind of up front. We used that for that. And they were beautiful. I mean, they looked so good. And we asked the people at Cornwall to fill those out, to give us contacts of friends or family or anybody that they knew in Snohomish County that might be interested. And then we asked them to reach out to those people themselves, you know, to tell them how awesome we were and how great the vision was and sort of prime the pump. And so the response at Cornwall was actually awesome. After sharing that weekend, we gathered up all the response cards and we got 108 contacts from the people of Cornwall, which was about what I was expecting. That was pretty good. And there was a buzz, and people were pretty excited about this. And so it's like, wow, here we go. We're off and running. Now, this was May of 2002. And so the timeline was for us to move here at the end of August. And so we basically had the summer to sort of cultivate a core of interested people. And then the plan was, as I mentioned before, to meet with them for about a year, grow it to about 100, and then launch Brookview. Okay, so over the summer, I literally made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calls. And you go, why didn't you email people? And I was like, I didn't know about email. And so I just made call after call after call after call. And after, 3 months of calling, it was time for us to sort of take the leap of faith and move down here and do this thing. Okay, so after 108 contacts and a summer filled with hundreds of phone calls, we moved here to a committed core of, little drum roll, give me a little drum roll. We moved here to a committed core of 3 couples. Oh, that's the wrong picture. Oh, babe, this is actually months into it. So, we had doubled in size by then, and that original core, and really almost everybody in this picture, was from Bellingham. Okay, so what turned out that basically they were all newlyweds in their 20s, and they were all from Bellingham. They had all gone to Cornwall, and they had all recently moved to this area, which was awesome because they understood the vision and they loved the idea of the church and they'd seen it. But it turned out to be a challenge because when we said, hey, you guys should go out and invite all of your friends and your family, they said, well, we don't have any friends or family here. That's why we're so excited to have you guys, our family. And so we would just get together and group hug. We were all transplants, and our whole core was transplants. And you can imagine it made it kind of tough to grow. But we committed to meeting every Sunday night, and we studied Scripture, and we hung out, and we prayed, and we'd hang out a lot during the week as well, because like I said, none of us had any other friends. And so after a full year, we had grown the core by about 300%. So if you do the math, there were about 24 of us now crammed into a little house on Sunday nights, which is not bad at all when you think about it, but not really enough to be the core of a brand new church. I mean, when you consider meeting in a high school and doing setup and tear down every week at Linwood High, and somebody running sound and somebody running lights and somebody to do children's programs and having greeters and people that do hospitality and do the coffee and all that, and having enough skilled people to do worship, because you don't want unskilled people doing worship. A core of 25 was really going to be stretched thin. But at the same time, we really felt like it was time to move out of the house. It was time to do more than just a Sunday night Bible study. And so after a year of meeting together, on September 28th, 2003, we launched Brookview. And so we decided we were going to have a full-on church service every week. Whatever that took, we're going to bite the bullet and do that. Now, we knew that our core was really too small to be doing that. But we decided to commit ourselves to weekly services anyway, because we figured we'd use the church services to grow our core. That it would, be really hard for us to grow if we stayed in the Bible study format, but if we went to church services, people would come. And on top of that, we had a fail-proof plan to grow the core and to grow the church. Now, here's what happened. In those days, new churches were using mailers with incredible effectiveness. I mean, the reports were, it was just mind-blowing. And the idea was that you would mail out a 10,000-piece mailer to the community, and you could just about guarantee at the very least, a 1% return on that. And so for those of you that are math challenged, for those of you that aren't, 1% of 10,000 would be 100. Good, excellent. About 100 people. So churches were consistently reporting, getting this kind of response. In fact, some churches in certain places were reporting like a 3 or 4%. So like 300 to 400 people coming to a single event or single church service just from a 10,000-piece mailer. Okay? So we would sit back and we could envision that first service. And we knew, okay, this has been hard so far. It's been a little slower than we thought, but we are going to explode. So we bit the bullet, and we spent several $1,000s, and we printed up our 10,000 piece mailer. And then we got it in the mail, and it was like, oh, these boxes is huge. It was just massive. And so opened it up, and we were like, uh-oh. It was horrible quality. I mean, the print quality on it was so bad. So we had them print a second 10,000 and get the print quality right. And we decided that we could really only mail the first 10,000 because we couldn't afford all the postage for 20,000 of them. We could only really afford 10,000. So we had this huge party, and the whole corps came, and we did all this labeling, and we did all the postage on these things, hours and hours and hours of address, labels and postage, and we prayed over them, and we laid hands on them, and we sacrificed a chicken. And so, if you're visiting, we didn't ask. We prayed and we mailed them. And then get this. This is where it got nuts. Instead of just like tossing the 10,000 bad ones into the recycling bin, we decided we would go physically hand them all out, like at the mall and stuff. So the 24 of us hit the streets for a couple days, just really long days, and it was grueling, and we were exhausted. And so we actually stopped at 8,000. We're like, we've had enough. That's all we can do. And we started to figure with the tiredness speaking to all of us, that with 18,000 out there, that was enough. After all, let's just think about it. What would we do if like 500 people came? So got all those mailers out, and we got ready for the first service, and we got it all set up at the old Linwood High School, and I had a message, and we had greeters, and there were children's teachers, and we had a band, including Matt McDonald as our lead singer, and we prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed for that first service. And we were so excited for all of these people to come flooding in. So get this, okay, from 18,000 mailers out there, we got, another drum roll, we got 4 people that showed up because of the mailer. Oh. Now, there were other well-wishers that had no intention of ever actually attending Brookview, that maybe came down from Bellingham, family members, and just different people that were like, hey, this is exciting, we'll come for that first service. So the first service, there were 60 people, counting the children and Dale, the custodian. But then the next week, we were back down to 30. And so let's go back to the childbirth analogy. If our church was a baby girl, she was born 5 months premature. She came out of the womb at 1.5 pounds, fighting for her life. And she was rushed immediately to the NICU. And by all accounts, really looking at, she should have died. It was an absolute miracle that she survived. And in those first several years, God did incredible things to provide. And that core of people, it was small, but it was stubborn. And they refused to quit, and they refused to give up, and they rolled up their sleeves, and they served their butts off. But the honest truth is, for most of those 11 years, we sort of just hung on by a thread. Barely enough people to keep meeting, barely enough volunteers to do the work, barely enough money to pay the bills. We were always on the verge of shutting things down. Now, the church did grow a little bit, especially the first several years. Within maybe 3 years or so, we would regularly get maybe between 70 and 110 people, again, counting children and Dale. We would get, 70 to 110 people at church. And there were, enough people to keep going, sort of. But we kind of, after the first few years, we kind of plateaued right about there. And we didn't grow beyond that. So between years 3 and 9, we were just sort of stuck. Now, like I said, there were lots of good things happening, but there just wasn't a lot of tangible progress. And so about 4 years ago, at the 7-year mark, Jen and I were on a walk around our neighborhood, and we got hit over the head with a hard reality. We realized, we just can't keep doing this like this. I mean, God knows we love these people, but we cannot just keep going without seeing more progress. Now, we know we're not in this alone. We have so many people that are absolutely breaking their backs to try to make this thing work. But if we don't grow, if there isn't some tangible progress fairly soon, we absolutely cannot sustain this. So I called my boss, and I laid out for him the situation. And if you're wondering, I don't mean that I called God. I actually do have a boss. We're a part of a family of churches, otherwise known as a denomination, but that's a bad word in our culture. So we're part of a family of churches, which means that I'm accountable to other people. And I happen to believe they're really good, really wise people. Okay, so I laid out the situation to my boss, solid guy named Matt, and he put me in touch with a guy named Randy. Randy from Portland. And at that point in his pastoral career, Randy had already retired from his church in Portland because it was a very powerful, very high-functioning church. It was like at 1,000 or more people. Not that I was jealous at all. And so Randy was now in charge of church planting in our region. And after listening to me describe our situation, Randy said, you know, I hear your dilemma, but I'm really not the best person to help. Truth is, I'm sort of a big picture guy. I operate at like 40,000 feet. Okay, but my wife, Kendra, is an amazing strategist. She's got her feet on the ground. She's an organizational whiz. And so let me have you talk to her and see if she can give you guys some ideas and some hope and some tangible steps. Let me hand you off to her and see if she can sort of coach you through this season. So Jen and I started meeting with Randy's wife, Kendra, via Skype, because she lived down in Portland. And after listening to the situation, she said, okay, guys, I want to see your flow chart. And I was like, what? Our flow chart? Why are we talking about menstrual cycles? I mean, I'm meeting with two ladies, and this is what happens when you meet with two ladies. It gets weird. But Jen seemed to understand right away that she was talking about our organizational flow chart. And I was like, oh. She said, I want to see a chart of all of the ministries that Brookview has, and then I want to know who leads the ministry, and then I want to know who that ministry lead reports to, and who that person reports to, and who that person reports to, and so on. I want to see on paper, okay, the organizational leadership structure of Brookview. She said, so take a couple of weeks, and then email me a diagram of your organizational structure, and we will talk about it the next time we meet. Okay, so we put that together, and we had about 4 things on it that went to me, and we had about 50 things on it that went to Jen. And so we sheepishly showed this to Kendra, and she said, you're not going to believe this, she said, I see a problem. She said, Jen, you have way too much responsibility, and also, every single ministry, big or small, reports directly to the two of you. So she's like, I just don't see how it could be any other way than this. Nobody can really move. Nobody can be empowered. Nobody can be creative or innovative or deal with problems without having a conversation with one of the two of you. And my guess is, she said, people know how taxed you guys are, how hard you're working. So they just don't have those conversations, and things just don't get done. And she said, I'm giving you an enormous task. I want you to develop leaders of leaders of leaders. Okay? You need leaders of leaders. You need leaders leading leaders. And so for 2 years, that became like the top priority to us. And many of you were asked to step into new roles, and you did. And, man, you guys have absolutely killed it, done an unbelievable job. And so now there's so much good stuff happening around here. And what's really cool about it is that Jen and I are not directly involved in a lot of it. Our leadership base as a church is so much wider. Okay, we're so much deeper. Now, maybe this is just coincidence, and I'm sure it is. But since then, okay, over the last 2 years, we've grown. And we've actually grown quite a bit. And the growth rate seems to be fairly stable, if not increasing. And we now have a structure that can support the growth. And the truth is, like, when the org chart was this smorgasbord of stuff that all pointed to either Jen or me, had we actually grown somehow, like all of a sudden, had we had an influx of 50 or 100 people, it would have been a mess. But now we have a much healthier structure, like this plurality of leaders. And I mean, if you think of it this way, a little different metaphor. If you're going to build a house, what's the most important part of it? The plumbing. You just don't want to live in a house with no plumbing, No, you got to have a foundation, right? You got to have, without a foundation, you'll never have a good house. And to be honest, it's taken us about a decade to build that foundation. Like to get a solid base of volunteers, to get a solid financial base, to have ministry leaders with a structure that supports them, to have leaders at the board level, to have a board actually guiding our church, to have a foundation that truly supports growth. And so if I move now to the question of where are we? And if I switch from the house metaphor back to like the childbirth metaphor, I would have to say that we have been out of the NICU for, well over a year now. We're no longer like this preemie that's fighting for life. If you can envision this, we're like a little toddler that's running and bounding and playing and jumping and running and just laughing and learning. And suddenly, we're like a kid is supposed to be, flourishing and growing. I was meeting with a guy in our church a couple of weeks ago, and he's a guy that's been on this ride with us from the very beginning. And he basically said, instead of thinking of our church as an 11-year-old, with all the fighting that we've had to do just to survive, like with all the time that we've spent in the NICU, not thriving, it would almost make more sense sort of to think of ourselves as like a 2-year-old church. Like almost a brand new church plant. And I thought, you know what? That's really true. Because for the first time ever, we really do have the building blocks in place. And one of those building blocks is something that we call Ignite. One of the ways that we make sure that we're growing and flourishing, that we try to do that, is to make sure that we're connecting regularly with our core. We're trying to create feedback loops all throughout our church where people with ideas can share them, or if they have questions, they can bring them up. So 4 times a year, quarterly, we gather everybody, okay, everyone who's willing to gather at Ignite. And just so you know, all of you are always invited to that. But at Ignite, we just talk about what's happening in the church. We have people share, and we let people ask questions. And it's a pretty informal environment at somebody's house, and then we worship. We remember who God is, and then we pray together for our church. But one of the things that happens at every Ignite now is that the board comes up and gives what we call a board report, which includes a financial report. And it's a very simple, just very basic, this is how we're doing financially report. Now, normally we save this for Ignite because talking about money in church makes people squeamish. So, like, when you invite your friends to church, if we talk about money, it might freak them out. Okay, they might come in and go, oh, and then leave skid marks. But at the last Ignite, the board shared the financial report, and it was pretty cool. It was really cool. And so I asked them to break all church rules and come up this morning and share with you what's happening with our church's finances. And so would you please welcome up here, we have Jeff Satterthwaite and Brendan Cloyd and Ann Herbig. And Christy McDonald is with us in spirit from, is she in Mexico? Yeah. She spent the budget, yeah. That's what happens. Keep giving, folks. Give till it hurts. All right, you're on.
Okay. Well, at Ignite, we were sharing our financials, which we do every year. Oh, up here. Sorry, not used to this. And so we were looking at them and talking about, how we did in 2014. So if you look at 2013 versus 2014 total giving, am I coming through here? I guess I am. We are giving, no, probably not. So in 2014, 2014 total giving was $185,000 compared to 2013, which was $155,000. If you do the math, that's 30% higher in annual giving, which is just super awesome. And then the other thing we were looking at is there's this little red line, and I don't know if you can see the little red line that goes across the monthly numbers. That line is what we need bare minimum to survive as a church, to pay our bills, keep the lights on, pay our staff minimum, and just keep things going. That's $12,000 a year. So in past years, we barely make that. And now when we looked at this year, most months we were well over that. And if I looked at the last 8 months average, we were $18,000. So was the average per month if we look at over 8 months. So what that means for us is that we're finally getting out of survival mode. We finally have 3 months of savings in the bank that could pay the bills for 3 months. And we can stop focusing on surviving and pray and focus on how we move forward as a church, how we grow our ministries, and as a board and as a church, we'll be working on how we move forward with that. But it's just really awesome news that, like Jason says, we're out of this survival mode and into the real growth mode. So we thank you all for that and your participation in that.
By the way, those guys have been awesome, and at one point, Matt Beach, those of you that know Matt, was a part of that, and Dennis DeSanctis, and they sat through some tough years and some lean times to try and figure out what are we going to do. And so it's pretty cool for them to now be a little bit more on the other side of this. Many of you know that for years and years, every summer, we take a team of whoever's willing to go to a thing called the Leadership Summit. And it's basically a series, like just one after another, of world-class speakers, mostly Christians. Most of them are pastors or leaders of Christian-based, like nonprofit organizations. And they're speaking on principles and realities of leadership. And sometimes there are speakers, every once in a while mixed in there are speakers from kind of the business world. And one year, there was a guy from the business world. It was one of the earliest, right after we planted Brookview. I think it was like 2004. There was a guy from the business world that gave a horrible talk. I mean, it was bad. He sort of, dude, do you know where you are? He was attacking Christians in his talk. And he told us, he just kind of said straight up, you all think and you all teach that we need to trust God. And he said, that's the most important thing. He said, you have it all backwards. You need to trust yourself. You just need to trust yourself. And then if you can learn to trust yourself, then you kind of work God into the mix. Now, that is not a popular thing to say to, 15 or 20,000 pastors and church leaders. Now, everyone was polite, and he didn't get booed off the stage. But I would imagine that whoever booked that guy for this venue, a Christian leadership conference, probably lost their job before he ended his talk. Anyway, because it was, it really was bad, and it's interesting though, because during that, it was, it's just horrible talk. It was so bad. And yet, in the middle of that, he shared a concept that I have never forgotten. And he shared the concept, and then how he illustrated it, I'm like, what are you talking? That's terrible. But the idea is fantastic. He said at any moment, we can choose to operate from one of two mindsets. We can operate from a scarcity mindset. This, I just don't have enough of what I need mindset. Or, he said, we can operate from an abundance mindset. This, look at all of the things that I do have mindset. And he said that companies and churches and families and organizations all have to decide which mindset is going to be the driving force behind everything for us. How we think, how we behave, how we operate. Now, the idea of that absolutely resonated with me, and I think it's because it was a profoundly biblical idea. Paul said it like this in Romans. He said, after laying out how much God's love was demonstrated to us through Jesus, he reasons, he says, what then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Is that an abundance mindset or what? And since the talk that day, that idea has sort of been ingrained in my mind. Are we operating at Brookview? Are we operating from a scarcity mindset or from an abundance mindset? Are we operating from a mindset that God actually gives us all that we need? That we've been given everything that we need to do what we've been called by God to do? That where God guides, he provides? Is that how we're functioning? Or are we just whining about all the stuff we don't have? Look at Randy in Portland. Look at all the stuff he's got. So I just want to do a little abundance assessment today. I want to, and I'm going to go through this really quickly in 5 minutes. I want to run through with you some of our abundance. In a church like this, when we have no building, we have no big staff, it can be easy to focus on all that we don't got. But I want us to think about some of what we do got. And I know that's not very good English. Pastor, that's not proper English. I know. Okay, but let's think for a minute about what we got. Think about some of the intangibles that enrich our little church, okay? Number one, we got devotion. From day one, the DNA here has been one of deep devotion. People have served and worked their butts off. Not just for a month or two, not just for one Sunday, year after year after year after year. Okay, it's not like just a handful of people are doing that. The breadth of people doing significant ministry here is amazing. This is a church of workers. You guys, you have so much skin in the game, and you very much care about outcomes. You want things to go well, but not in a consumeristic sort of way. There are lots of churches all throughout our great nation that are filled with consumers. People that go and they really only care about what's in this for me. Will the sermon wow me? And if you're here, you know the answer to that. Will the music move me? Will the children's program be dynamite for my kids? What programs can the church offer me? And to some extent, okay, to be honest, we all care about that stuff. And we should, right? You don't want pointless sermons and just painfully horrendous music. You don't want to send your kids to programs that they hate. We care, okay, and we should care. But we don't just take. Consumers, they would just like take and take and take, and they never give back. This, guys, if you haven't noticed, this is a church of givers, of servers, of workers. The devotion here amongst this group is off the charts. Okay, you know what else we got? We got unity. There are churches, and some of you have experienced them, where people are fighting over the dumbest things. I mean, they bicker and they bicker and they bicker, and it's like a tug of war all the time. It could be the style of worship. It could be the color of the carpet. It could be the brand of the coffee. It could be pretty much anything. People will complain and they will argue and they will rally other people to their side of the issue, and pretty soon, nobody's getting along and nobody's happy. And I actually know pastors who live and pastor in this reality. And I'll tell you what, I can't imagine. I actually have no idea what that would be like, because you guys are so willing to put aside your own personal preferences for the sake of us coming together in unity. I mean, you'll share ideas if you have them, but you don't just go to war. You don't rally troops to your side of the battle. And that kind of unity, the kind of unity that we have here, is far more rare than you would think. Third thing, we got sincerity. Sometimes you gather with Christians, and it feels like a big, fat spiritual competition. I mean, the way they talk, what they value, there's this pressure. And so everyone's just kind of putting on a face, pretending that they have it all together, pretending that they're more spiritual than they are, that they know more than they do, that they're holier than they are. One of the things that I deeply value about this community is we don't have all of that crud going on all the time. You guys aren't competing with each other to be more spiritual than the person next to you. You aren't walking around trying to look and sound impressive. You just enjoy each other as is. And there is so much safety in that. And it's life-giving and it's refreshing. Another thing we got is openness. This is not the kind of community where everybody's friend list is full. I mean, as connected as you guys are to one another, you're incredibly good about looking to be inclusive. Always figuring out, who else can we invite in? Who else can we include in this? And it's beautiful. Okay, and then this last one is freshness. And this one, like, I was hung up. I was like, how do I find a word to describe what I'm trying to get at? And, you know, you could go a lot of different directions with that, and it could get weird. But here's what I mean. I have another pastor friend, who fairly close to here, whose church is about 100 people. Okay, so it's similar to our size. But everyone in his church, well, not everyone, let's say 98% of the people in his church have gray hair. You know what's amazing, Bob, is everyone knew who that was. So this guy's about my age as a pastor, and you know what he wants? You know what he wants in his church? You know what he's desperate for? Young people, young families, right? He wants more young people. He knows that his church needs them. He's desperate for them. But the problem is, if they ever do come, which is rare, they feel like they don't fit in, and they hardly ever come back. Okay? So when I say freshness, I think you get what I'm saying. There is a youthful energy that permeates this place. And it's a powerful thing. It's a wonderful thing. And there are a lot of churches that are dying to have it, and they can't figure out how to get it. They're trying to get it, and they can't get it. They don't know how to do it. And I look here and I go, we've just been blessed with it. And so I want to relook just real quick here at some very depressing church statistics nationally that we actually looked at in the fall. So this is a little review. Many of you were here for that. We saw this. I want us to look at the percentage of each generation that will be in church on a given Sunday. Okay? So for builders, ages 69 to 87, this is pretty staggering to me. 60% of the people in that generation will be in church on a given Sunday. Okay, for the boomers, ages 50 to 68, 45% will be in church on a given Sunday. Okay, for busters, my generation, Generation X, 15% will be in church on a given Sunday. Now hold the last slide. Millennials, ages 14 to 33, how many of you remember how many of them will be in church on a given Sunday? 4%. Many of you remember that. 4%. Oh, you can throw it up there. Now you think about that, and you think about the state of Christianity and of faith in our nation and where it's all heading, okay? Did you know that the average church in America it's about 111 people, and the vast majority of people in those churches, as you can see from these stats, are between ages 50 and 87. Now, we did this once before. I want to do it again because I want this burned in our brain. I want a little visual, a sense of Brookview, and God bless you, Eloise. But if you are in the builder generation, would you just stand up? Got it. All right. All right, those of you in the boomer generation, would you stand up? All right. Thank God for you guys. Okay, those of you in the buster generation, my generation, Generation X, would you stand up? Very nice. All right, millennials. Wait, don't do anything. You guys have young knees. You're spry. I want you to spring up on 3. 1, 2, 3, bam. That is awesome right there. Matt, you're still in the millennial generation. It's fresh. It is so fresh. Okay, obviously, and we mentioned this in the fall, what's happening in our church does not mirror the national trends. And I'll tell you what I've noticed about the younger generations, okay, out there, is that they're not like this hopeless lost generation. You look at this stat and you go, oh, what a godless generation. Heaven help us, you know. They're going to be running the country, you know. From what I've seen, these folks are actually very interested in spiritual things. They're very open to the idea of God. And they are looking to give their lives to things that matter. They're incredibly philanthropic, okay? They want to go out, they want to be activists, they want to do good stuff, but they're having a really hard time seeing how any of that has anything to do with church. They're suspicious of organized religion. It feels fake to many of them. It feels way too programmatic, too irrelevant, too confining. You know what I think they need? I think they need to be engaged by sincere Christ followers that are humble but devoted to Jesus. People that know how to serve, that know how to listen, that know how to love. And they need to see us in inspiring kinds of relationships with one another, but in ways that are inviting and natural, not like these holy huddles that are exclusive. They need to see us serving in an organized way together, serving the world. Because you know what? They actually want that themselves. They admire it, they're drawn to it. And what I see in the younger generation is this like hunger for meaning. They're hungry for something meaningful. They're hungry for community, a place to belong where people are real. They have this hunger to give themselves to something bigger than themselves, and they long to do it along with good friends. It's interesting to me because what I think these younger two generations are hungry for is exactly what churches are supposed to be. And so you know what that says to me? It says that we are, if you look at us, we are powerfully postured to impact these generations. We are. And when I think about where we've been and I think about where we are, I realize that we are set up to go on quite an adventure together from here. Will it include a church building someday? Maybe it will. Will it include a much larger staff someday? I think it probably will. But mostly, what I believe it will include is this generation. And that's what matters most, more than a building, more than the size of our staff, that we're including this generation in what we're doing. I believe it will be all about us engaging people in this generation. It will be about watching people in this generation fall in love with God and realizing that church is not something to be feared or avoided, that it is actually the place to live out their deepest longings. And if I can help it, that is where we're headed. But it's going to take a lot of hard work, and it's going to take a lot of creativity, and it's going to take the full power of community. And it's going to take things like unity and devotion and sincerity. But most of all, it's going to take supernatural power. I don't know if you realize this. This is not a human project. So, where are we going? I don't know exactly. I can't come up here and give you all the specifics and the 2-year and the 5-year and the 8-year plan. But here's what I know. We're going to listen to the voice of our Father. And we're going to engage this generation the very best that we can. And we're going to do all of it together. And to be honest with you, I can't imagine a cooler thing to be a part of.